Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Riccardo Bosi, independent candidate for the seat of Greenway in New South Wales at the upcoming federal election on the 21st of May 2022. Alongside me today is Paul Busuttil, independent candidate for the seat of Boothby in South Australia, also an independent candidate for the upcoming federal election on the 21st of May 2022. Now, Paul is an A1 supporter, as am I, and because of that, it means that we know that Paul has been vetted and Paul is in alignment with Australia One policies. We are independent candidates, though. We are not A1 candidates, and that's what everyone must remember. We are truly independent, but we are aligned in our policies and our approach to the governance of this country. So I'd like to introduce Paul. Paul, tell the people a little about yourselves, please.
Thank you, Rick, for inviting me along. Yes, as Rick mentioned, my name's Paul Busuttil, and I'm the true independent for Boothby. I first started my career in the insurance and finance industry. Started at age 17, but I later in life started my own business as a financial planner, and I continued that over 30 years. And I got to the point where I started to realise that these finance companies were ripping off my clients. And I started to question these issues. And it was about the time just before the Royal Commission into the finance industry. Now, at that time, these life officers, which were the investment companies, they were very desperate for business. And 3 of them came along to me and said, well, look, we'll offer you $10 million interest-free if you twist all the business over to where it currently is, over to us, and continue to write business with us. So immediately I thought, well, I know where that money's coming from. So I managed to get some sleep that night, and early the next morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, I shut upright and I turned to Lynn and said, that's it, I can't do this anymore. I can't possibly go back to my clients and lie to them after what I know. So within 2 or 3 weeks, I sold my interest in the business, and I was unemployed. Fortunately, Lynn and I were working on a program, a personal development program, that targeted business people, executives, virtually people from all walks of life. And we're being trained in group therapy. And we devised our own program and took people from all walks of life to show them the human side of us that's been taken over by the almighty dollar. And that was very successful. And that was the beginning of my career in counselling and psychotherapy. And I've been a counselling psychotherapy now for 32 years, and quite happy to continue it because I love helping people, and I love seeing the smile on their face when they're emotionally relieved. But a warrior called Riccardo Bosi, and I was sold within 5 minutes. And that's when I joined his team, basically, to build an army. I wasn't able to visit Canberra because of personal reasons. However, Lynn and I continued to help him build the army. And about 3 days prior to the nominations deadline, I realised that no one was representing Boothby, which is quite a disappointment. Now, traditionally, South Australia has always been known as the backwash in Australia, mainly dominated by the population. And I felt that we truly needed true representation here in South Australia. So Lynn and I had a chat, and overnight we made a decision to put our money where our mouth is, and we were able to raise 180 signatures, and here we are. We had something like 3 weeks to virtually organise and structure a campaign, which I believe we've successfully done. And here I am.
That's a great story, Paul. Truly, it really is, and it reflects the same qualities of character and capability that the independents that have presented themselves from the supporter group of A1. Let's go through some issues that are of particular interest to you, some hard political issues, most of which are not being addressed by any of the major parties. So let's kick off with your opinions on the selling off of Australia.
Okay, well, let's start off with our ports. They're either leased or sold to communist-dominated countries. You look at organisations like JBS, I don't know whether you've heard of it. They're commonly known as the Butchers from Brazil. There's an interesting documentary available on YouTube. Now, these two directors have served jail time in the United States. They've managed to build a $1 trillion organisation by basically raiding countries. They've been successful in the United States and parts of Europe. They openly admit the reason for their success is their successful bid to bribe politicians and VIPs. Now, I'd like to know who let them into this country, because they've taken over our large dairy farms, our large beef farms, our large piggeries, and now they're into taking over our salmon industry and abusing that as well, because they're trying to extend the almighty dollar and polluting our seas. Now, I'd like to know why the Australian people weren't asked for permission to do this. This is our country and does not belong to the politicians. They are mere custodians. They're our assets and they belong to us. And if I get to Canberra, I'm going to turn that place upside down and make sure that all that property is returned. And no doubt, these guys from Brazil will have some vengeance against the people that authorised that sale. We won't have to put them in jail.
The Foreign Investment Review Board sounds like it's got a few questions to answer. That's a good one.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul.
And whilst we're on the land issue, many people don't realise that our Lands Titles Office have been sold to corporations. And some of them, and I haven't got to the bottom of all of them, particularly in New South Wales, has been sold to a conglomerate overseas. Now, they clearly state, if you can, you can ring the Lands Title Office, they'll tell you that your current lands title certificate is no longer valid. It's illegal. They're claiming they're not going to issue a certificate. And I think through public opinion, they might have to issue something. But you can bet your life that your identity will be shown in capital letters. And a lot of people don't realise the significance of that. Whenever our name appears on capital letters, like our driver's licence, every time we open up a bank account, every time we open a utilities bill, every time we go to court, we're converted from a human to an artificial person. Now, according to maritime law, an artificial person cannot own property because they are non-living. The moment you die, you lose the right to own property. Now, that should be of enormous concern to the Australian people. Now, some people have taken this literally and said, well, so what? It's a corporation. But if I ask you, Rick, or if I sell you a wheelbarrow, for example, for $100, right? And 6 months later, you sell it for $200. Can I stop you?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. That belongs to you. Now, imagine you are a corporation that's just bought the Lands Titles Office. That's pitiful. And this corruption needs to be exposed.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. Moving on. Late and mid-term abortion.
Definitely not. I can't see any sense in that. Can you imagine a mother bearing a child, sharing its blood, sharing its breath, communing with its heartbeat, communing with its emotions? And when it's time to celebrate its life and introduce to its father, the mother kills it. How barbaric is that? And everyone is rejoicing about that piece of legislation that is rife throughout Australia. That is totally disgusting and inhuman. We are turning into subhuman species to tolerate that sort of legislation. All for the value of a small live human being, which fetches up to $500,000 on the black market. And Big Pharma is one of the main perpetrators of that industry. So, you know, Australian people really have to take a real firm look at their conscience in allowing corporations, and they are corporations, they're not governments, to manipulate through mass hypnosis so that we have no feelings. And so, you know, we voluntarily give our rights to the government, and we need to stand up to this. And why is all this happening, Rick? It's simple. According to maritime law, silence is consent. And with people that have been hypnotised, are automatically silent, and they're not there to express their true feelings and their thoughts.
It's extraordinary, Paul, because if you go back, I mean, you and I are of an age, I guess, but we go back 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we couldn't imagine a world in Australia in which the baby at the point of birth is killed. And it's called healthcare.
And what's wrong with a mother going full term and providing a couple, a loving couple, the opportunity to raise that child and still being able to identify the real mother? I see no problem with that. It's a no-brainer.
I agree. Absolutely agree. Pedophiles and pedophile protection.
Okay, we all know about the list of 28 pedophiles in the New South Wales government with a suppression order of a 90-year term that was introduced by a Liberal government. Okay, and of course, the list of pedophiles that were listed in the Mulligan report in South Australia. A similar set of circumstances with a suppression order of 80 years. Now, the reason they've given for that suppression order is that it's not within the public's interest. Well, who in the hell are they? What right have they got to tell us that it's not in our best interest? What are we, some infant that can't think for ourselves? No, we want to turn Canberra upside down and shake the filth that exists and the corruption that exists. And the Australian people have had enough of it. And just quietly, so have I.
And it continues to this day. Aussie Cossack was, I went to court today to provide support to the Aussie Cossack. I didn't get a chance to see him because we were there for 2 hours and he didn't come through. But he has now been arrested for breaching a court order, to wit, a suppression order of a pedophile. Now get this, the pedophile was charged, found guilty of 13 counts of pedophilia, and so he's guilty. There's no doubt about it, and he's awaiting sentencing. Now, rightly or wrongly, the Aussie Cossack mentioned his name in public, revealed it, broke the court order. He is now being charged. And the pedophile is still having his name concealed. I won't repeat it for obvious reasons. So this is going on all the time. And so the guilty pedophile is having his name protected by the state. Something stinks, Paul.
It certainly does. And an ex-Prime Minister, and I know who it is.
I think we need to see those names. What do you say?
Absolutely. That's the first job on the agenda in Canberra.
Good. Okay, moving on.
And also child trafficking, not only pedophilia, but guilty of child trafficking, because that's rife within the VIPs of our governments and judicial systems.
It's a global issue, in fact, and as we pointed out before, you can traffic guns and you sell them once and they're gone. You can traffic drugs, you sell them once and they're gone. But these sick individuals are trafficking children, and they can use them over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And as we know, the war in the Ukraine is a center for some of this, apart from all the other nefarious activities. So yes, absolutely.
That's right.
Electoral reform, specifically recall elections.
Absolutely. Look what's going on in this election. People being told they can't use pens, they have to use pencils. And what about the this pre-election facility? Now, I've been around to these pre-election facilities, and the only corflutes that are around are Labor and Liberal. Clearly, it's been designed to disadvantage independents. And certainly that has to change. And I've heard of other horrific stories in that regard. And I know that, you know, you've got a number of incidents, and I have too, and they'll be documented and delivered to the AEC. Yeah, we'll see what the outcome is and whether or not we need to upturn this election.
I think there'll be some grounds for that, because even in my electorate at the pre-polling place, we had two instances where the AEC staff were telling electors they couldn't vote with a pen; they had to vote with a pencil and to go away. That was challenged, and the returning officer admitted that the advice by the AEC staff was wrong. We had another incident where an AEC staff member was assisting an elderly gentleman into the polling place. He was holding, in fact, one of my how to votes, and the allegedly independent AEC staffer told him, "Oh, you don't need that. They're an independent," and took it away from him. We have multiple witnesses to that. Now, both of those incidents are going to be pursued formally with the AEC, and the complaints will be sent to the divisional returning officer. So the electoral system, you think, is rotten and needs a complete workover, Paul?
Absolutely. It's a complete stuff up.
Well,
you can't make this stuff up.
They do it every time. Every time. Okay, last one. Let's look at tax reform and your key points on that.
Well, I think our idea of tax reform is an excellent one. 2% tax across the board. Everyone pays the same. Abolish all direct and indirect tax. That includes land tax, capital gains tax, all these other ancillary tax, especially this new petrol tax that they're proposing. You know, it's endless. What are they doing with all this money? We've done the sums, and we believe this country can be run profitably, quite profitably, with funds left over, with a 2% consumption tax. Wouldn't you agree, Rick?
Oh, absolutely. And look, for people who don't believe that's possible, there's 2 points. First of all, governments spend money like drunken sailors. Secondly, they don't spend it on things we need. It goes straight overseas to special interest groups. $500 million to the Clinton Foundation. $500 million to some tiny Great Barrier Reef Fund that had more board directors than they had members. They had no desire for it. They had no application for it. The Prime Minister at the time, Turnbull, just decided to send him $444 million. Now, just so you think this can't be done, listen to the numbers. And this is from our numbers man, who's an absolute legend. The total value of electronic payments, and this is 2019 figures, is $255 billion each business day. So each business day, this is 2019, and the numbers aren't too far off now, $255 billion was the value of electronic non-cash payments. Terrific. Now, there were 251 working days in 2019. So to calculate the total taxation revenue on that basis would be the $255 billion per day times 251 days and calculate 2% of that. And that's the total tax that the government would take. That gives a revenue, an annual revenue of $1.28 trillion. 1.28 trillion. Commonwealth and state spending that same year was $735 billion. That leaves a surplus of about $500 million. It's extraordinary.
It's simple. You don't have to be an economist.
They have been robbing us blind, Paul.
Absolutely.
And it's time we gave the money, we let the people keep their money because it is their money. And you must have seen many examples of this sleight of hand by various government entities in your time as a financial man.
Yes, I have. And corporations are designed to make profits and, well, spend up big because they feel it's their money. But, you know, we've got to remind the Australian people that the government that we appoint is a custodian, not an owner. We are the owners, they are the custodians. They do what the people tell them to do. They don't throw money around prior to an election and then turn around and do what they goddamn well like. Because that's what's transpired decades after decades after decades. And that's about time. If people want real reform, you can't leave it in the hands of the majors and their hangers-on. And that's another issue. You know, there are a number of so-called independents, right, that accept funds from large institutions that are laundered through, you know, large institutions, just so they can be called independents because it's popular and it's likely that they might, you know, get a few more votes. These sort of things need to be exposed. And also the contributions to elections needs to be properly regulated on an even keel, on an even plateau for all participants. Now, the role of a senator is an employee of the people, and people need to be reminded of that. And we want to introduce a system whereby if a senator doesn't perform within 3 months, he gets sacked. And if I get appointed and I don't perform, sack me. I deserve it. And that's the message I'm sending to the Australian people.
I don't think there'd be any shortage of agreement with you on that one, Paul. Sack them all, I think, was the battle cry at the last Freedom Rally.
Yeah, it was.
In my opinion, there wasn't one that has earned their pay. Just to wrap up quickly again on that tax one, just so you are clear, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand that you pay somewhere between 60 to 70% tax, depending on your profile. With our 2% expenditure tax, that's Paul's and mine and all the other independents, this is the taxes it will replace. Personal income tax, gone. Capital gains tax, gone. Corporate taxes, gone. Trustee liability taxes, gone. Goods and services taxes, gone. Property taxes, gone. Stamp duties, gone. Luxury car taxes, gone. Payroll taxes, gone. Fringe benefits taxes, gone. Superannuation taxes, all gone. It's your money. You get to keep it. Sounds pretty good to me, Paul. What do you think?
Absolutely. And the other thing too, I think is worth mentioning here, is that these policies that we're presenting to the Australian people, even though it's not a half-baked policy prior to an election. They were formalised over 2 years, but they were conceptualised 2 years before that. They would have had to have been. So these policies have been formulated from a conceptual basis to a formalised basis over 4 years.
It's been a labour of Hercules, and we've had
Absolutely.
a magnificent team putting it together. And the
I
full
know, and I really do congratulate you, Rick. I cannot fault it at all, and I've done the sums, and I believe we're on a real winner for Australians. And I think every candidate, and there are 11 of us, I believe, in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and West Australia, are all very, very genuine people. Their heart is in the right place. They truly want to represent the Australian people. They've done their sums. They're not going to dish out something to their people if they're not happy with it. And unlike these political parties, you know, one voter said to me, well, why have you voted for, given your preference to an independent in the Senate? And I said, because he's the only independent in the state. And if I tried to negotiate with a political party, I'd have to negotiate with the senator, and then he'd have to go to a committee, and depending on the invested interest of that party, like one particular party that's always looking for land mining rates, how far do you think I'm going to get negotiating with that party? Whereas if I vote for an independent, I know I can talk eyeball to eyeball on the same level, heart to heart, and come to some sort of agreement. Whereas I couldn't normally with a political party.
No, you're on the money. The parties control the candidates. Independents are responsive to the electors, and that's the way it should be. Ladies and gentlemen, you've had the privilege of meeting Paul Busuttil today, the independent candidate from Boothby, a man that we stand behind and beside. He's a man of character and capability. You can't do better than Paul. So the electors of Boothby elect Paul Busuttil as your Member of Parliament, and he will serve you with distinction and honour as he has done his entire life. Paul, thank you very much for your time today, and good luck on Saturday.
Thank you very much, and the same to you.
Thanks, mate. We'll see you on the hustings.
Okay. Bye-bye then. My name is Paul Busuttil. I've authorised this interview. My address is 69 Sheoak Road, Belair, South Australia, 5052.
And this is authorised by Riccardo Bosi, independent candidate for Greenway, 122 Perfection Avenue, Stanhope Gardens, New South Wales, 2768.